Moms deserve our very best, especially on Mother's Day. There's only one place I trust to deliver high-quality, mom-approved rose bouquets. 1-800-Flowers.com. This year, 1-800-Flowers wants to make sure all the mothers in your life get the best, with double the roses for free. When you buy 1 dozen, they'll double your bouquet to 2 dozen roses. To claim the double roses offer, go to 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/Spotify, the official florist of Mother's Day.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
Mr. President, you've said...
I don't want to talk about that because I have no intention of firing.
April 24th, 2025, the one thing even Trump won't do edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C., from New Haven, Connecticut, the New York Times Magazine, Yale University Law School, and her attic, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
This is my dining room. Thank you very much. Hello, David.
That's your dining room? For all this time, I thought this was your attic.
I used to be in my attic, but this is my dining room.
Gosh.
Did you notice all the... Yeah.
Well, that's not visible.
True.
All the wood paneling. Henry was noting the wood paneling. Also joining us is Henry Blodget, first-time Gabfest guest host, which shocked me that we hadn't been as gracious enough to invite him before. Henry, of course, is the founder and editor of Regenerator, a new publication focused on innovation. And he is also the founder and was the longtime CEO of Business Insider, and an old friend and an old Slate colleague, and much beloved in the Plotz household. Hello, Henry, from Brooklyn.
Hello. It is such a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
John is away because I think he's in Rome because he's at the Pope's funeral.
Yes. And we are not going to talk about the Pope without John, just to start that off. We'll wait till he returns.
This week on the Gabfest, Trump threatens to fire Fed Chair Powell, then backtracks when the markets bark at him. Then religious parents are about to get another big win at the Supreme Court. Then how long will even Trump support his chaotic defense secretary, Pete Hegseth? Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter. So apparently there is a line that Trump won't cross. He will do anything for tariffs, but he won't do that. So Trump and his top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, who surely knows better, rattled the global economy this week when they both hinted that the administration was looking for ways to remove Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Powell, the independent chair, whose second term runs for another year, cannot be removed by the president except for cause. In this case, the cause would be that Trump doesn't like Powell because Powell and other Fed governors have indicated that Trump's tariffs are destabilizing the economy, a true statement, and that they don't want to lower interest rates, which Trump is clamoring for them to do, as Henry will explain, because of the economic uncertainty in the world and the risk of stagflation if they do that.
No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates. This is a perfect time to lower interest rates. If he doesn't, is it the end? No, it's not. But it would be good timing. It could have taken place earlier.
So world financial markets dry heaved at the possibility at the end of Fed independence. The dollar and U.S. bond prices sank. And as of the middle of this week, Trump retreated and also even at least hinted at lower China tariffs. So, Henry, what is the nature of the Fed's independence and why is it so important to world financial markets?
Well, if you look at around the world, politicians and presidents always want to control the money supply because that gives them the ability to effectively inject the economy and create enormous excitement for a brief moment before they destroy the value of the currency by causing runaway inflation. And so Trump is certainly not alone in wanting to have influence. In fact, in the United States, going back to Richard Nixon, part of the reason the Fed has been so independent is that he tried to do the same thing and pressure his Fed chief. So this is nothing new here. But the reason it is so important is that time after time, when the leader of the country also takes over the money supply, the currency gets destroyed. And that is terrible for everybody in the country, and it destabilizes everything. So we have had a very independent Fed. So far, we seem to be holding on that. But as you just described very clearly, President Trump, when he gets up in the middle of the night and starts raging, is trying to see how far he can push it. And I know Emily can tell us about the sort of legal issue here about whether he could fire the Fed chair. But given the way this administration has acted so far, the way it would likely play out is he would fire Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell would probably not be allowed in the building, and then it would be litigated for years. So I don't think we're going to wait for a legal determination as to whether he's actually able to do that before he takes action.
So yeah, Emily, to that end, how secure in your reading of the law is the independence of the Fed? We've seen a massive assault on all kinds of other presidentially appointed positions and what were thought to be independent entities. Is there any reason to believe that the Fed is somehow different? I mean, if you have a maximalist belief about presidential power, as a lot of Supreme Court justices seem to do, why should the central bank be treated differently than the SEC or the EEOC?
The main reason, I think, is just a blend of law and politics, that for all the reasons Henry said, it would be so cataclysmic, so bad for the American economy, for America's standing in the world, that the Fed is just in a different category from other agencies. And I actually still think that the main protection is political, that there's maybe a utility for Trump in blaming Powell and flirting with firing him, but then pulling back. And I'd love to hear in a minute, Henry and David, what you all think about that dynamic and whether it is itself destructive over time. Legally speaking, there's a 1935 case from the Supreme Court called Humphrey's Executor.
I wanted you to say Humphrey's Executor. I refrained from saying it.
Kind of a great name for a case. And in that case, the Supreme Court ruled that the independence of the Federal Trade Commission was constitutional. In other words, President Roosevelt asked for the resignation of one of the commissioners of the FTC, and the Supreme Court said that the Federal Trade Commission Act, which, set up this agency independent of direct presidential control, was constitutional. And the kind of underlying issue here is that, because of the growth of the administrative state, and the 1930s is the perfect time for this, right? It's like an FDR expansion. You have all these agencies that get created, and Congress wants them to have a certain amount of independence from the president. So Congress writes laws that say, after these commissioners of the FTC or whichever agency, after they're appointed, they can only be fired for cause or for malfeasance, something that limits the president's discretion. And the sort of basic question is, if this agency is within the executive branch, why is Congress allowed to limit the president's power to fire someone at will? And the answer then was, well, because, that's an Article 1 power. Like Congress, as the separate branch, can exercise that kind of authority. This current Supreme Court, as you were saying, David, is much more sympathetic to this maximalist version of executive authority, in which presidents would be able to just kind of willy-nilly fire the heads of these independent agencies. And there have been some moves in that direction in the last several years by the Supreme Court. And I think lots of court observers think that the court would move further if given the right case. But the Fed is probably not the right case. You could imagine the Supreme Court just coming up with some reason, whether it makes sense legally or not, to have an exception for the Fed, given its particular, enormous importance in world affairs.
So, Henry, Powell has another year to run. So there's been this speculation, Trump should appoint a Fed chair in waiting who will comment on everything that Powell is doing and be like, oh, that was a good move, or wow, that's really stupid, or, just like a heckler in waiting for the Fed chair. And then, but that people have sort of said, well, that doesn't seem like a good idea either. But it's pretty clear to me, at least, that Trump, when he gets the chance, will attempt to appoint a Fed chair who's got a much weaker backbone than Powell does. And we'll appoint someone who is much less likely to be as independent as Powell has been. Powell, of course, was a Trump appointee to begin with. So won't that be an independence crisis too, if there is a weak Fed chair who succeeds Powell?
That's right. And the great irony here, of course, is that the reason President Trump is so exercised about this is because of what is happening because of his trade war. That is why the markets are in chaos. That's why the economy is starting to be a chaos. That's why he feels like we need to cut interest rates because the economy is under pressure. The economy was doing really well when we had this transition of administration. And then Trump did exactly what he said he was going to do, which was launch this trade war. And uniformly, with some notable exceptions, economists have agreed that a broad-based trade war like this is actually bad for the country that imposes tariffs because it slows growth and it increases prices and it causes trading partners to retaliate. And in the case of the China tariffs, it is basically just caused a complete cessation of trade with one of our major trading partners. So there is severe stress on the global economy. So in that case, you might normally have a Fed chair say, I got to do something about this. And what I'm going to do about it is give the economy a couple of cups of coffee and get us going again by cutting rates. So that's why President Trump is so exercised. But again, it's because of what he has chosen to do. So going forward, the good news for those who would like to see markets more stable and have more confidence in the United States fiscal discipline, which has kept the United States such a home for the world's capital for so long, is that there are other folks on the Fed board. And it seems less likely that Trump would immediately fire all of them. And that even if he appoints a new chair, even if the new chair is a wacko, you still have other Fed governors who presumably can use their financial discipline and keep things stable. But again, that might lead to calls for cleaning house on the Fed board. And again, I think, Emily, I'd love to hear your view on this, but I do think that the way the administration has behaved so far is you fire first and worry about the legality later. And it often takes so long that it doesn't matter by the time a ruling appears.
Oh, well, that has absolutely been true in other agencies. I mean, for sure. Like there are people, the head of the Merit System Protections Board has gone like in and out of office a bunch of times. What about this temporary dynamic we have of Trump railing at Powell? Because like in one sense he does it and the markets, go down and then he sort of takes it back and then they like the gyration. Does the gyration over time do its own damage or can he just...
Yes.
Okay, explain.
So the markets are gyrating wildly, and Henry, you can give us like chapter and verse, but it seems like it's more volatile than any period in modern history, even like COVID, even in 2008. They go up, they go down, they're up. The fundamental instability is that there's no predictability, that Trump is making it impossible for businesses to plan. Even him saying, these are the tariffs, live with it, I'm not going to change it, this is what it is, in a way would reduce the amount of volatility, at least allow people to plan and go forward. But Trump is built for volatility. Trump's basic temperament and his nature, the nature of his demand for fealty and tribute, his longing to be the center of attention, his insistence on public negotiation and public, this way that people have to come and kneel before him is just inherently uncertain. Uncertainty is the key to his ego. He has to be fickle. He has to be unreliable because that's what causes people to come and suck up to him is to kind of get themselves out of jail in the moment. But that uncertainty forces everybody to be constantly responsive, and it's just impossible to plan a business and an economy when that happens. And so I just don't even see, I mean, yes, the markets can sort of stabilize for a day, but unless he basically settles on a policy and sticks to a policy, we're just in for this for the next forever.
That's right. It's this collision of something that is so boring that you can barely even talk about it in a normal time, which is trade policy and so forth, with someone who is actually a master at commanding media attention, which often comes down to acting in an unpredictable way, perhaps saying things that are inappropriate and surprising and late night and keeping everybody on their toes and focused. He's great at it. But then when you combine those two things, if you look at what Trump is sometimes saying he is trying to do, it is to address the fact that over the past 50 years, and particularly in the past 20 or so, manufacturing in the United States has declined, and it has hurt a lot of people in the United States. And the jobs that they can get after they get laid off when jobs get moved to China are not nearly as good in terms of remuneration and sometimes a sense of self-worth and so forth. And they're angry about it. And that is completely understandable. And as a country, we should absolutely try to address that. But if you think the answer to that is let's rebuild manufacturing in the United States, then you want to really think about what manufacturing. Are we going to bring back sneakers and T-shirts, or are we going to invest in semiconductor manufacturing and driverless cars and industries of the future? Then you say, what would be the best policy to do that? And again, it's really boring stuff, which is you have a 5 to 10 year plan. You're going to make investments in certain areas. You're going to invest in manufacturing R&D. You're going to subsidize certain industries. You might even have targeted tariffs on individual countries or for individual industries. They would be all part of the plan. And David, to your point, you would then say, here is our plan. We know that you, our companies, need lots of time to plan, and your planning cycles are a year or 5 years or 10 years. So we are going to phase it in over 5 years. You have 2 years to get ready, and then it's going to come in. And Apple, for example, a great American company that has spent decades building a world-class global supply chain that, by the way, serves the world, not just the United States, cannot just put that supply chain on a ship and ship it to Texas overnight and start building iPhones. They can't do it for a whole host of reasons. So by suddenly enacting these tariffs, you are punishing great companies and people that you say you're trying to help. But again, it does generate good ratings. So again, we have this collision of the two personalities, the boring trade policy and a president who loves to be, as you said, in the media.
Emily,
I'm just shaking my head in despair. That's all.
Here's the good thing. As you pointed out right at the beginning, David, the markets don't care about politics. They don't care about who wins these battles. All the folks who invest in the markets, which, by the way, is a global consensus of investors, is what is likely to happen. And what we have seen from the beginning of the trade war and certainly the press conference with the reciprocal tariffs billboard and so forth is the market hates these tariffs, thinks it's going to be terrible for world trade, bad for America, bad for American companies. And so every time the tariffs get pumped up or every time Trump threatens to fire Jerome Powell, the markets go down. Every time he backs off, they go up. And my hope is, and I've written about this, I really think President Trump's smartest move he can make here in the trade war that he has started is to say, I won. I got everybody to the table. We're going to do these amazing deals. And because people are so eager to do these deals, you know what we're going to do? We're going to postpone all the tariffs indefinitely. And sure, if we don't get a great deal, we'll put them on eventually. The markets would soar. Americans would be so excited because they would be so relieved that we're not going to plunge into a recession with layoffs and spiraling inflation and everything else, that they won't even care if a bunch of pundits say, hey, wait a minute, you just started this whole thing and then you caved completely. Where's the master negotiation? They won't care. They'll be so relieved.
Can you actually finish this topic where we probably should have started? Because you're somebody who worked in the markets. You understand this better than I'm sure most of our listeners. When the dollar and U.S. bonds are weakening, what is actually happening? And why is that a frightening signal for people?
The frightening signal is that global investors, which will certainly include a lot of institutions in the United States who can invest all over the world, but also European investors, Asian investors everywhere, are deciding that the United States is no longer a safe place to keep capital because they no longer trust that we have a government that ultimately, after all the rhetoric, will do the right thing for the economy and the dollar and so forth. They're saying if President Trump is so committed to tariffs, even though most economists will say that it's a bad idea, that is not going to accomplish what he wants it to accomplish, and he's so stubborn that he will fix what's happening to the economy by firing Jerome Powell, head of the Fed, then you know what? We are talking about a market that is no longer trustworthy. So let's put our money somewhere else, like Switzerland or Germany, where we feel like there are folks who are not going to risk the economy and the markets to carry out their own policy.
And so how would they do it? They're selling U.S. bonds that they don't want.
Yes. And as we know, unfortunately, one of the other things that's going on, and this was one of the reasons that a lot of people are excited about the idea of Doge, is that we have a huge budget deficit. And we were, very strong economy last year, massive budget deficit we've got to do something about. And so that is already causing the United States to have to sell enormous amount of bonds to fund the government and fund the country. And as interest rates go up, doing that gets more and more expensive. And effectively what interest rates going up is telling you is there are fewer buyers, or they need a higher interest rate to compensate them for the risk of having capital in the United States bonds.
Right. And every time the interest rates are higher, it means we are paying more in interest, less money to actually run the government.
Yes, we are. And as one coda on that, in the first few days after the press conference where we announced the reciprocal tariffs, you have a lot of folks who support President Trump saying, look what's happening here. This is just a way to get interest rates down. And that's going to make it much less expensive for us when we have to buy money. It's the 4D chess thing. And then interest rates started going the other way as soon as there was this talk about firing Jerome Powell. And it looked like, in fact, the tariffs were not just a negotiating move, but are actually going to be a regime. And that's where interest rates started to go up and the dollar started to go down as capital started to flee.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Home Chef. Making dinner should be fun. So are you in need of fun inspiration for dinner? Home Chef is here to make searching for new meals and cooking a new dish something to look forward to. I have been on a taco kick with Home Chef. I made a gingery tofu taco the other day. Actually, my son Gideon made it, to be fair. He made it. It was delicious. He did a great job. We made a one pot Korean pork taco that was incredible. These Home Chef tacos have brought a new arrow into the quiver of my cooking. Making tacos at home is not something that occurred to me I could do. And they're just delicious. Plus, I've had a super fun time making them with my son. Users of leading meal kits have rated Home Chef #1 in quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering Gabfest listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/Gabfest. That's homechef.com/Gabfest for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life. Homechef.com/Gabfest. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Do you say data or data? In my circle, we say data. And for the longest time, paying a fortune for a monthly data plan felt normal. That was until Mint Mobile came along with premium wireless plans that started just $15 a month. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says more people should be trying this out. It was really easy for him to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home. He uses his existing phone. He didn't even have to change his phone number. And he's on the $15 a month deal and is getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. All Mint Mobile plans come with high-speed data or data, your choice, and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. No matter how you say it, don't overpay for it. Shop data plans at mintmobile.com/Gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/Gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Emily, tell us about Mahmoud versus Taylor, the case argued this week at the Supreme Court that is going to give yet another win to the free exercise clause.
Yeah, this is a perplexing case, and I say that because I find mostly the school district's policy and decision to litigate this pretty baffling. So the Montgomery County School District wanted more inclusivity for
in Maryland, my neighbor.
Maryland, exactly.
Great school district, one of the best in the country.
Yes,
really, really, really good school district.
They were trying to be inclusive, and they introduced a bunch of LGBTQ themed books into the modern language, like reading curriculum for kindergarten through 6th graders. Some of the books disturbed religious parents. And mostly we're talking here about immigrant parents. Most of the parents are Muslim or Ukrainian Orthodox with some Catholics in there too. And they wanted an opt-out for their kids. They were saying, it's fine to have these books on the shelves. It's fine for you to teach them in class, but we don't want our kids to be part of this instruction. And, some of it is like just same-sex marriage, but there were also parts of these books that went further than that, like a book about a puppy at a pride parade where some of the words you're searching for include things like leather and drag queen. So at first the school district said, sure, you can have your opt-out. And then a couple of years ago, they took the opt-out away. They said all the kids have to sit in class for this. There was a wave of protest, and a couple of the school board members said quite derogatory things to kids and their parents about the protest that really suggested some, the legal term is animus, some bigotry against these religious parents for their objections. And that's this case. The case is the parents saying, we just want to be able to opt out our kids from these books. There is also kind of interesting wrinkle here where the elementary school principals in the district had actually written a long letter to the school district saying that some of the books they felt were age inappropriate, just like not right for that age group. And that also some of the guides to teachers about what you're supposed to say to the kids if they have questions were like super inappropriate and saying things that like are not factually true even. So the Supreme Court conservatives kind of had a field day with this case this week because it just seemed pretty evident that forcing people to have their kids listen to things that and take in instruction, really like be told in a kind of moralizing way that there's a right way to think about these issues is really problematic. So yeah, the school district is going to lose, and I just remain confused about why they thought the policy was a good idea and why they possibly thought they were going to get a good ruling out of this very conservative Supreme Court.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy.
It's baffling. Yeah.
It does. I hadn't read a lot about what was in this curriculum, Emily, before we started reading about the case. And, look, I'm a progressive person who is, I want tolerance for all kinds. I think the way that gay people and the way that trans people have been treated in this country is disgraceful. But it does seem that Montgomery County stuck these books into the required curriculum because they were trying to encourage a particular view of tolerance and about the nature of sexuality. They're not written really to educate kids about reading. They're written for persuasive purpose about a question that is like deeply complicated and about which lots of people have highly contentious differing opinions. And that some of those opinions are founded in their religious beliefs. And it seems like a provocative and kind of pointless thing to do, to deliberately sort of poke people on this topic and then not allow them and then not permit them to say, hey, this touches something very fundamental in my family and my religious belief. And can we just not participate in this? It's like such a provocative act, and it's perverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me there just seems something fundamentally illiberal about telling parents who are thinking about how their little kids learn about gender and sexuality, like you have to be in lockstep with us. Even if it's for the best goals, like even if inclusivity and tolerance absolutely is the well-intentioned good faith effort, when you have a lot of people saying to you like, no, this is objectionable, usually the liberal response is to like think deeply about how to accommodate that belief. And instead there was a kind of scorn, and that scorn is going to matter legally, right? So I think the interesting thing about this case is how does the Supreme Court answer this question? Because the lawyers for the parents are asking for a very broad rule. They want parents to be able to object to anything, all the way through the end of high school and get an opt-out for their kids nationally. And there are some states that have policies like that. This came up in oral argument. So it's not like it's totally unworkable everywhere. There aren't that many parents who do a lot of objecting. So, usually it works out okay. But Justice Kagan in particular kept saying, like, well, is there another way we could draw this line? Because that just seems to, in a sense, like the Supreme Court decreeing that every state and school district in the country has to let every parent opt out for any reason. Maybe that also is going too far in the other direction. I mean, that's what the school district invited by taking this case. But still, like, that might not be the best rule. And so one possibility instead is that if the school district was clearly motivated by some kind of animus or bigotry toward the religious parents, the Supreme Court could say, well, if you institute a policy like this for that reason, that's impermissible. And we're not going to reach this larger question of whether this policy could exist for any reason. Or that's door number one. They could also make a rule that has more to do with little kids. I think everyone can agree that there's something like particularly unsettling about little kids being kind of moralized at in this way. It makes the word indoctrination really like come to life. But the court has not in the past like really distinguished elementary school from middle or high school. So I'm a little uncertain about how it would do that. But you could feel Kagan kind of, she was sympathetic to these religious parents, I thought, but you could feel her kind of reaching for something.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, just looking at it from the outside, not from the legal perspective, school boards and curricula are always so contentious, even in relatively homogenous communities. And we see this politically, but America is so diverse in so many different ways. And I think that the basic message of, listen, if we are going to all be united by being American citizens, we have to have a very wide prism for tolerance and inclusivity and that sort of approach. And certainly looking at these books, absolutely, that promotes an important part of tolerance and inclusivity. At the same time, I think to both of your points, maybe there should be more recognition from the school in saying, look, let's also have tolerance and inclusivity for a wide range of views on this and not at least force it into the curriculum. And what scares me actually is the idea that this would be a national decision that is suddenly imposed on the entire country. And then we have enormous national fights about local curriculum. And to me, that's just a recipe for disaster. And certainly when we've talked about a household here, like the idea that a rural town in Texas that has a very clear view of the world suddenly gets to impose curriculum on New York or what have you, that's where you really begin to say, like, to me at least, it's just very hard to imagine a federal approach to this completely.
Emily, I wasn't quite clear. So the parents are asking for a right to opt out of any lesson that they feel is inappropriate for their children, but that's not based on religion in that case. They're saying it's based on some sort of form of parental control. Or is it only any lesson that implicates their religious beliefs? Yeah,
it's a free exercise challenge, free exercise of religion. Okay. So yes, they want to be able to opt out of anything they object to on sincerely held religious grounds.
Right. I don't think so. So from what I understand, Montgomery County raised this objection. This would be too complicated very late in the game.
They did.
That Montgomery County at the beginning just tried to bully these parents into saying you can't do it. And then later they said, it'll be too inconvenient. Everyone's going to be opting out. We don't have the classroom space. We cannot manage it. And I guess I am skeptical of the idea that actually there's that much in American school curricula that many parents are going to spend that much time sort of combing and making sure their kids are opting out. It's basically sexuality, sex education, and, maybe some bits of science, like the evolution parts, but then their kids will just fail tests.
Well, another thing is like the pictures of the Prophet Muhammad. That's a big thing. You're not even allowed to look at them. So that came up in the litigation, just to add to your facts.
I don't think it's going to be a huge, even if parents win a sweeping victory, I guess I'm skeptical of the idea that there's going to be every school is going to have like a dedicated auditorium, which is where you go when your parents object, and that auditorium is going to be filled every day. I think it's actually a very small number of people pay attention that much, care that much, and send their kids to public school in such a way that they're going to be constantly monitoring it. That's my own theory.
I mean, I think that in the states that have these broad opt-out policies, that is seems like it's pretty much true, at least from the facts that were being discussed this week in oral argument. There's another way to think about this, which is that your local school district is basically supposed to reflect the mainstream views of the families and parents. And so if you have materials where there's like a huge outpouring of objection and protest, then like maybe those aren't the right materials for your community. Not that there's something inherently wrong with them, just that like you're out of step, and that's a sign. And especially with really little kids and teaching them about sexuality, it just seems like you want to err on the side of being very mainstream. And making sure you want kids to think in, ways that are, again, tolerant and inclusive, but you want that to happen within a framework where you're being respectful also of the beliefs of the adults. Otherwise, it's just like not going to work, right?
You just said what I was trying to say much more articulately, which is to say exactly that, which is, listen, if you've got, in one of the things we read, we were talking detail about dozens of children walking out. The idea that you're regularly having that happen in an elementary school, to me says school administrators, get to know your community a little bit here. And like, let's teach stuff that we can, it certainly is okay and tolerated by a broader group of your constituents.
Yeah, I mean, the age-appropriate part of this always gets me. I feel like I actually have a very conservative idea with generally of what's age-appropriate. Like, my kids read books that were incredibly upsetting in high school and school, and I was like, why are they reading these super upsetting books? Like Flowers for Algernon, that like really upset one of my kids, and I don't know.
Is that the incest book?
No, I don't think so.
That's the super intelligent mouse.
Yeah.
Who then loses his super intelligence. It's a very sad story.
Fine but I don't know. There's something about books that really wrench a kid's hearts. I'm not sure. I think reading them at school is the greatest idea personally. So I have some sympathy generally about this.
I mean, I guess I often think about like the difference between a school library and a school classroom. I think it's great for school libraries. I think there's so many books that I checked out at the Lafayette School Library that touched me, that moved me,
totally
that
agree.
Affected me. And I'm so glad that library was filled with books of all sorts. But that's different than it being taught in a classroom where everyone is. Also, you don't want kids to have to, like an 8-year-old, you don't want to have them confront their own religious beliefs and have to share their parents' concerns about something to a bunch of their classmates who are going to make fun of them. That's a terrible way for them to learn.
Right. So it was important to me in this case that the lawyers for the parents said it is absolutely fine for the books to remain on the shelves. That was an important fact. There's a good piece in the New York Times by Megan Stack, who's a parent and a writer for the New York Times opinion section, about this case. And I think she gets at a lot of the subtleties in a way I appreciated. One of the things she also talked about was that her parents opted her out of some of the sex ed curriculum when she was growing up because they were conservative. And she said, look, like, did it mean that I didn't learn about like condoms? No, it did not mean that, because actually kids, when then like I went and sought it out for myself. There's so many ways in which that information came to me through media, through friends. Like, it doesn't really work to wall kids off from controversial ideas, but it also might be that they're better off discovering them on their own.
I went in two cases. I was at private school. One Christian private school as a Jew, and when I was at school in England, there were religious chapels, and they took the Jewish and Muslim kids and just put us in a room elsewhere. And so we just sat in a room. And then when I went to a Christian school here in Washington, D.C., whoever you were, you had to go to the chapel. So I went to a lot of Christian chapels. And both of those experiences were I found funny. Like, I didn't really mind being dragged out of and missing the chapel at the school in England and hanging around with the other Jewish and Muslim kids, nor did I mind having to go to chapel. I guess I didn't feel like it's obviously not the same situation, but I think neither case damage my mental health, I think.
So glad to hear it. Other things damaged your mental health.
Yes, clear.
Emily, just to take us out of this topic, are there any other big religious liberty cases coming our way from the Supreme Court? Which, as I said, like there's no bit of the Constitution they love more than that free exercise clause. They want find people exercising freely everywhere.
Yes, indeed. Yes, there is a case coming up soon. Oklahoma wants to pay for, with state funds, a totally religious Christian charter school. And this case, if the Supreme Court says, yeah, Oklahoma, go ahead, then, we're just going to have a free-for-all in a lot of conservative states in which public taxpayer dollars are going to go to religious schools for religious instruction. And that is so far a bridge the court has not crossed, but the bridge is now laid out right in front of them. Coming soon. This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. I really need new pajamas or a new nightgown, just some sleepwear that works better for me than the raggedy tank tops and old pajamas that I've been wearing. So I went on the Saks website and found a whole bunch of lovely things in nice light materials, silk, satin, cotton, all kinds of different two-piece sets that I could imagine happily wearing, lovely bathrobes. There's something really pretty from a designer called Natori that looked really nice, and something else from another designer called Eberjay that I'd never heard of. These are the kinds of things that you can easily find if you go online and shop at Saks. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and want to elevate your personal style, head to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration.
Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast. Life comes with big money questions like, are target date funds a smart or lazy way to invest? Can you deduct your dog as a home security system on your taxes? NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast has the answers. Their finance journalists break down investing strategies, tax planning, and smart ways to build wealth and navigate big financial decisions. Work smarter, not harder, on your finances this year. Follow NerdWallet's Smart Money podcast wherever you listen. And stay tuned until the end of the episode to hear the Smart Money trailer. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. Mother's Day is around the corner. Yes, it's around the corner. Remember that. And if you're looking to give a high-quality, super thoughtful, and affordable gift for the special and strong women in your life, check out Quince. My mother is a very special and strong woman. She's a great woman. She's always cold, so I'm going to get her a cashmere sweater from Quince. The cashmere sweaters at Quince, I have a couple of friends who have them already. They love them. They're incredibly high quality, super comfortable, great colors. And the best part is that all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Plus, Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. So purchasing a cashmere sweater or 14-karat gold jewelry or Italian leather bags or fragrances feels good. Thoughtful, timeless, totally her. Shop Mother's Day at Quince. Go to quince.com/gabfest for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/gabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gabfest. What a surprise. The TV host with a history of mismanaging small nonprofits, of tolerating lewd and obnoxious behavior, is turning out not to be a great administrator of the Department of Defense. Pete Hegseth's DOD has become a clown show of scandal and incompetence. 2 different signal chats where he's sharing war plans with people he shouldn't share them with. Most of his top aides, the people he brought in, he is drumming out of the department amid vague accusations of disloyalty and leaking. His own former spokesman writing a column in Politico accusing him of total incompetence and mismanagement, total chaos at the Pentagon, said his spokesman, former spokesman. His chief of staff accused of using meetings with veterans groups to tell stories about strip club adventures. Not to mention that Hegseth also just seems to be not very good at the basic facts of the job. He didn't include his own Joint Chief of Staff chairman in war planning against the Houthis. He has apparently just been totally away when they need approval on certain defense measures that the Trump administration wants to push. He is, however, posting a lot of content on social media of him working out. He is good at that. That is the thing he's very good at. So, Henry, why do you think this level of dysfunction and chaos is being tolerated by the administration, also even by Republicans in Congress for the most part?
Well, I think Republicans in Congress still are following pretty much what everything President Trump wants. And if you look at President Trump's hiring criteria, which he gets to dictate, number one, personal loyalty. Number two, does my base like him or her? Number three, do Gabfest listeners, are they repelled by him? Good. And so forth. And Hegseth has all other than number four, which I would actually promote to number two. Does he look good on TV? And Hegseth does. He knows TV. So he has everything there. We have already seen, particularly with the Trump administration, but I do have to say, looking at government and politics from the business world, it is remarkable what politicians and political appointees can survive that would get you ejected out of any job in the private sector instantly. I don't think Secretary Hegseth would have been appointed in the business world. He certainly would have been gone weeks ago in the business world. But apparently he still has a line open to President Trump. They talk. President Trump, for now, has confidence in him. And we know that I think President Trump likes being shouted at to do something by the right people and then refusing to do it. So again, unpredictable, wouldn't surprise me, as you laid out, David. He clearly has lost the trust of his immediate staff. And with a big organization like that, you kind of have to have the organization behind you to at least some extent to survive. And it sounds like he's losing that. But for now, the president's still behind him, so he's in good shape.
Yeah, I don't get this at all.
Well, Emily, I think we talked about this during the Hegseth nomination, and either you or John pointed out that literally Hegseth is put there to test people's fealty to Trump.
Yeah.
Because he is anathema to so many people. He is not qualified for the job. Like, it's a really important job for which he is not qualified. So it's not just he's not qualified. He's not qualified for a job that literally determines national security. He has not only no qualifications professionally for the job, he has enormous personal failings, like including personal failings of the sort that Trump himself has around behavior towards women. And if he got through, it truly signaled that you can't oppose Trump, like that it made people show their fealty and made people kiss Trump's feet. That vote was in a normal circumstance, that is he gets 10 votes from the Republican Senate. But in this case, he got all but 3 votes in the Republican Senate because people just felt like we've got to show loyalty, even though they know he is not capable of the job. And so I feel like that's
right. But now we're like a couple months in. He's been much worse than anyone even expected. His own people around him are either gone, like drummed out because of leak investigations, which may or may not be valid. Who can tell? And like some super Trump loyalist is writing an essay in Politico about what a complete disaster and chaos agent he is. So it's like the buildings are 3, 2, 1, start over. The voices are inside the building now. They're like the people around him saying he can't run this department. And it is the Department of Defense, which is a big thing that's supposed to matter to Republicans, to everybody. And yet it doesn't. It's his loyalty and his TV presence and MAGA appeal matters more than any of that, like much more. And it doesn't seem at all obvious that he is going to lose his job. We didn't even talk about the second Signal chat, right? Like he also started a Signal chat in which he was sharing these war plans, let's just call them that, these like details about an impending attack on the Houthis in Yemen with people who had no authorization to see them, including his wife. Like it's just staggering. And it's a new Washington reality. It would seem to be bad for the Republicans. But there's so much happening that they don't seem to be willing to really address it, with the exception of a few individual Republican voices.
It does sound like the drip, drip, drip and something new coming out every week and so forth is starting to weigh on the Trump administration. And it sounds like there was one report this week, they're considering alternatives. So it does seem like he's in a precarious position. But yes, as you described, like having your entire staff that you brought in 3 months ago turn on you publicly by name, that is extraordinary. And so it is just this incredible loyalty that he has to President Trump and the support of the base that is actually keeping him in place.
Can we talk about Marco Rubio? Or do you want to keep
Yeah, no,
talking
I think we should talk about Marco Rubio because Marco Rubio is in a way the kind of converse of all of this.
Well, kind of, except that arguably what he's doing is even more surprising in the sense that he seems to be willing to go against all the principles he used to hold about how the Department of State is supposed to operate, upholding American values abroad, helping Ukraine fund off bullying Russia. All of that just completely gone because of his own subservience to President Trump. And, he's like the loudest applauder because that's how you win within this administration. But from the outside, again, it's pretty amazing.
It's interesting. I find myself really, struck. I'm very curious about what Rubio is doing at the State Department. I'm horrified by what's happening in almost everything else I read about what's happening the Trump administration is doing. I am curious about what Rubio is doing. I thought that what they did with USAID, shocking, totally unforgivable, just completely destructive to human well-being and to America's interests. It is not clear to me that the U.S. State Department isn't overdue for a reorganization. Weren't you surprised to hear that there were 746 different offices in the State Department? I was surprised to hear there were 746 different offices in the State Department. That seems like a lot of different offices. That seems like maybe they need to simplify a little bit what they're doing. Maybe it does make sense to consolidate 132 of them into something else.
That's right. I'm with you on that, David. And looking at this again from a business perspective, we talked earlier about the budget deficit. Something has to be done about that. It is not sustainable. So in a very calm assessment, that is probably going to involve a combination of new revenue from somewhere and a reduction in spending in somewhere. And if in a business, or as we will have to do in the government, what you would want to do is step back, look at that clinically, analyze it without a lot of emotion, put together a plan to simplify and make the organization tighter and save some money, basically. And it seems to me when I read about how he's approaching this at the State Department, doing that in a much more clinical, thoughtful way than certainly the way Doge came out of the gate, which scared the heck out of everybody and is not the way anybody but somebody who bought a private company like Twitter and Elon Musk and extraordinarily bold and go in and do something that really pretty much nobody else does, would ever approach it. And so I do think there are two approaches here. And at least what I've read, Rubio's approach to the State Department seems reasonable if one's goal is to streamline and ultimately save some money.
Well, I can't tell it all, mostly because I really have no idea how the State Department operates, I will confess. But it does sound like, potentially eliminating all the Fulbright scholarships and other exchange programs could do some real damage along the way. And, those are the kinds of efforts that really foster international understanding, gain America a lot of credit and, sympathy abroad, etc. So I feel like I have to speak up for that. Though, I mean, the changing the org chart, sure. I mean, if they're doing it in good faith, then okay.
Well, I mean, I think there are two points here, Emily, that you're hitting at. One, which you already talked about, is that what Rubio appears to be doing is not even congruent with his own beliefs as expressed over the last 20 years of his career, and the abandonment of Ukraine being one particular example.
Yeah, that's overwhelming me right now. I will say.
And the destruction of U.S. foreign aid, which again is something that Rubio has historically been behind, and at least the principle of it. The other point is the kind of the nature of the reorganization, and is it a destructive reorganization that is damaging America's long-term interests? And I guess that piece of it, I am willing to say they won this election. They're pursuing policy ends, and they don't appear to be, unlike with Doge, which came in, with a chainsaw. Rubio basically kept Doge away from the State Department. He basically pushed Doge away from the State Department and said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And so he is pursuing a policy, which is, I think time will tell us, is this a smart policy that, husbands resources and reallocates them in the directions that should be allocated, or at least that Rubio and Trump think that should be allocated? we'll find out. But it doesn't. It appears to be done coolly and with a plan in mind, and that I think that's all you can ask for somebody whose politics you don't agree with, but who has power that they've won, and he has won the right. Trump has won the right to redirect how U.S. foreign policy works. I would rather it be redirected in a way that is kind of rational than in a way that is purely chaotic, the way it seems to be at DOJ.
Yes, and I think this whole situation and the contrast between the DOJ approach and what Rubio's doing, and Emily, to what you said, really highlights the challenge about restructuring government, which is every bit of money the government spends, some people love. And Emily, I'm completely with you on what you described. Like, wait, why are we going to eliminate those? Like, there got to be a lot of other things that we could eliminate that'd be totally fine. But they all have their special interest groups that love them. And pretty soon, even presidents who come in and say, we're going to restructure government and save money, eventually they can't really do much because it's so entrenched. Whereas in the business world, a management team does have more power. Shareholders have more power to say, yeah, we know that a lot of people like these particular things, but they got to go. The company's got to get on financial footing. And it's just much harder to do with government. So it is interesting to watch. And of the two of them, I certainly very much prefer Secretary Rubio's approach, which does seem thoughtful and clinical.
I don't want to leave the Hegseth topic without just talking about how cruel and disgusting I think the behavior has been towards certain service members, notably trans service members. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the military, and they were saying that in their office, the orders came down that you had to refer to people by the pronouns, not their preferred pronouns, but their pronouns of their biological sex as determined on their birth certificate. And so people who had been called ma'am for years, who are women who are serving, now they had to say, yes, sir. And it's just like what is the fucking point of that? Like, what is the point of that stupidity and cruelty?
Yeah. And I mean, it goes against any approach you would ever have for having a cohesive team where everybody supports each other. It is mind-boggling.
Yeah. And just basic human dignity.
Let us go to cocktail chatter. Emily, when you're sitting in your dining room with Mr. Bazelon, who I saw stick his head through earlier, say hi, and having a drink, what are you guys going to be chattering about?
I am going to give all of our listeners a break from my usual gloom and doom chatter about a book I just finished and a movie I just watched, both of which I liked and had nothing to do with current American politics. The novel is called Sandwich. It's by Catherine Newman. I think it came out.
Oh, yeah. I read that book.
Good, right? It was
Very
really
charming.
fun. It's like the light version of All Fours, the book about menopause by Miranda July. This one like goes down easier. Catherine Newman, I would say, is like just less extreme and absurd than Miranda July. I really liked All Fours mostly too, but this one I just found very easy to read and enjoyable. So, Sandwich, Catherine Newman. And the movie I watched,
it's like, but just to give people, it's like a beach read for people like Emily Bazelon.
Yes,
like a beach read for people who style themselves to be intellectuals.
Oh, I guess that's right, because there's like some actual intellectual content. And I thought you meant who are like washed up old ladies.
Well, you are yes, you're definitely a washed up old lady. That's for sure.
Yeah, I had to read parts of it out loud to my husband to be like, see, I'm not this angry and mean to you. He was the jury's out about that. Anyway, good book, I thought. And the movie I watched, which I think maybe is also from last year, is called Lee, Lee. It's with Kate Winslet. It's about Lee Miller, this amazing photographer for American Vogue who I'd never heard of, who is super feminist and determined in the 1940s, figures out a way in 1944 to be at the front. And she is there when Dachau is liberated. She is in this very famous photograph taken in Hitler's bathroom in his actual like house. It's her in the bathtub. The film shows how she helps arrange this photo. Kate Winslet was amazing. It was really, I just really liked it.
Henry Blodget, what is your first cocktail chatter of all time?
Well, I'll give you an actual cocktail chatter that I heard the other night that I was very surprised by. We're not going to talk about the Pope and the process, but I was amazed at listening for over an hour at a dinner table the other night as people read through all of the candidates and their virtues and their different attributes. It was very exciting. And suddenly this movie that I dimly remember called Conclave was being pushed at me so enthusiastically that I was to go home and start it immediately because it's such a great movie. And here's the Ralph Fiennes character and so forth. So anything, it's going to be, now I'm suddenly interested in this process when I would not ordinarily have been that focused on it. But
the
that
movie
is
not that good, but you should watch it.
The movie is
'cause
totally
it will
good.
tell you. I did not like it very much. It's sort of ridiculous.
Gosh.
And I will say that one of the candidates, apparently, I believe his last name is Pizza Balla.
Awesome.
He was a
Clearly
big
he
fan.
should win. But
Pizza
then
Balla.
it's his
At the table,
name,
yes.
and it won't
Yeah.
even matter. I never remember what their real names are.
But
That's
so
true, right?
here's my cocktail chatter, which is that a couple of years ago, AI was launched. Immediately, pundits say, "Oh my goodness, this is going to just mow down all white collar jobs. Finally, it's the revenge. It's not just manufacturing. All white collar folks are going to be put out of business." So forth. Little has happened over the last couple of years, but I was talking to a partner at a big law firm this week who said that, in fact, the time has arrived where there is now consideration that they will hire far fewer lawyers in the future. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, AI can do a better job in a much quicker time looking at a 250-page document and redlining it than a third-year associate out of Harvard. And instead of 2 weeks, it takes 2 hours. So we need far fewer people, and that's going to be good for our clients. And in fact, and I said, well, but how could you think about that, your clients? And you have to reassure them. And so I said, listen, clients may view it as derelict if we don't actually use ChatGPT or whatever tool it happens to be, because then we're charging them so much more. And so that, and in other areas, you hear it in banking, you hear it in consulting, you hear it in
Medicine,
coding,
reading
certainly,
certain,
I think.
like charts and x-rays and
That's right.
EKG
So we are
things.
getting to the point where I do think this is going to start to have an impact on the job market. And I would say, because as soon as I say that, the response is, oh, the job apocalypse and so forth. For Gabfest listeners, this is a tremendous opportunity for you, because I'll tell you what will be needed more than anything else is people who actually know how to use these tools. When Excel arrived on Wall Street, and people didn't have to sit there all night in pencil and pen, adding up columns of numbers to put the books together and so forth, but could have a spreadsheet do it. It was the people who knew how to use the spreadsheet who are immediately in demand, and it will be the same way here. So yes, demand will change, but there will be a lot of demand for humans who really know what they're doing with these tools.
And that's also what we're talking about this a bit in our Slate Plus segment, by the way. So that's a preview. My chatter, this is a little bit for you, Emily, which is that I read a story in the New York Times about the comeback of an actor from one of my favorite TV shows, Friday Night Lights. So Minka Kelly, who was Lila Garrity on Friday Night Lights, the cheerleader, had this period where she was Esquire's sexiest woman on the planet in 2010.
Deservedly so.
And then she kind of vanished. And she's been out of acting more or less for a decade. And she is back on a Netflix show called Ransom Canyon, which is about it's like if Lila Garrity had grown up. She's a woman who runs a dance hall in the Texas Hill Country. And, you know, there's kind of modern ranchers, there's football. There's a handsome Tim Riggins-y dark cowboy character played by Josh Duhamel. There was a profile of her in the Times, and it was lovely. She just seems like an absolutely lovely person. She's had a really hard life. She had a terrible childhood, apparently wrote a memoir that was a bestseller just about her terrible childhood. But she's been through a lot, and I'm so glad to see Lila Garrity back in the world again, in the world of acting. So
totally
yay.
going to watch that show. But I have a small nit to pick, which I feel like the show is more about the Tyra character, what you imagine was going to happen to her. That the Lila Garrity character, in my mind, went off to college and became some pre-professional in a city. Anyway,
But Tyra, by the end of the show, Tyra's going to UT and has made it out. Henry's nodding. Are you a Friday Night Lights stand
Yeah,
too?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I kind of thought she was going to be in Texas forever and hang with Tim Riggins. I don't know. That was my idea for her.
I do think there needs to be a Tyra. Adrienne Palicki, that actress. She was awesome.
She's great.
She's awesome. And she's had bits and pieces here and there, but I think we're due for an Adrienne Palicki revival as well.
In the meantime, though, we'll take Minka Kelly.
I look forward to reading that.
So, listeners, you have also kept great chatters coming our way. Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. We would love to hear about what you're talking about at your cocktail parties. And our listener chatter this week comes from Chris Schreiber in Oakland.
Hi, Gabfest. My chatter this week is about an article on history.com called The Deportation Campaigns of the Great Depression by Becky Little. The current immigration horrors are nothing new, but memories are short and few know of the scale of similar past efforts. In the 1930s, the government, including federal, state, and local officials working together, removed hundreds of thousands of citizens from the country, most of Mexican descent. Some estimates approach 2 million. Calling that campaign a deportation effort or a repatriation does a disservice to what it actually was: the forced and racist removal of American citizens and other lawful residents. It was a shameful stain on our history driven by economic fear. If there's truth to the adage, it's critical that we learn what has been done before because we're on the road to repeating it. Thanks for your great pod.
If you want to hear more Slate podcasts, Death, Sex, and Money has a great episode this week. Are airline pilots allowed to be depressed? If you want to fly a plane, you have to prove to the FAA that you're physically and mentally fit. But are the rules outdated here? Pilots who take antidepressants are limited to a short list of approved medications. They also have to take a mandatory 6-month leave, and they can get reviews that will ground them. And the FAA is trying to keep the public safe. Obviously, you don't want a suicidally depressed pilot in the cockpit. But is it causing pilots to stay quiet about their own mental health? So listen to Death, Sex, and Money. Are airline pilots allowed to be depressed? That is all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. Our guest host, Henry Blodget, has created a team of AI colleagues to work with him at his media startup. We're going to talk to him about his weird and somewhat terrifying AI project. But you have to be a Slate Plus member to hear that. Slate Plus members get so much good stuff for their subscription. They get bonus episodes of our show. They get discounts to live shows. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy our segment with Henry. If you are not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/GabfestPlus to get access wherever you listen. That's our show for today. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For Emily Bazelon and the delightful, and you can always come back, Henry Blodget, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. Money can be confusing. Should you invest in ETFs, get a travel rewards credit card, buy a house, or just build a really fancy pillow fort?
That could work. No shame in pillow fort game. Or you could just tune in for clear, research-backed financial insights.
I'm Sean Piles, a certified financial planner professional.
And I'm Elizabeth Ayola. We're the hosts of NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast, where you bring the money questions and we bring trustworthy information backed by NerdWallet's expert analysis, without the jargon or the sales pitch.
Our nerds do the research so you don't have to. We'll help you understand your options so you can make the best decision for your situation, from optimizing your investments and maximizing credit card rewards to making big money moves with confidence.
Plus, we keep it real. No lectures, no judgment. Just tips and tools you can use to build wealth and take control of your finances. Think of us as your financial GPS, helping you navigate your money decisions and avoid expensive wrong turns.
Whether you're planning for retirement, weighing a big purchase, or just want to make your money work harder for you, we've got insights that you can use in real life.
So if you want practical, straightforward, and actually useful financial knowledge, plus a little bit of fun along the way, follow NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Trust us, future you will thank you.